reason why the last several times you failed, but it's not just that, Robin. There's just the
Yeah.
but that was definitely a factor why I was stalling out about the same day, where the real starvation kind of was hitting, and the HCG wasn't working. So anyway, I mixed a new batch, and I'm starting to feel that in my bloodstream. So that real physical hunger is going away, and I've been really trying to work on using your hunger scale. Detecting hunger has always been very difficult for me because I am an emotional eater. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay, and then so what you're you reached out to me just because you wanted to, of course you want this round to be successful. I'm assuming you've had maybe, most people that do the HCG protocol have a miraculous first round, and it just so happens to be that their subsequent rounds after that tend to just go down the tubes.
Yeah, and I've had some successful second rounds because I did it between pregnancies, and so I think that I would say that one of the kind of realizations, the reason I'm doing it this time primarily is I don't feel good. I have constant chronic hives. I have inflammation throughout my body. Night flat sweats, pains in my joints. I don't feel good, and I'm constantly exhausted. So,
would you mind if I ask what your age is?
I'm 48.
Okay. Are you menopausal?
Not yet. I'm kind of pre-menopausal.
Okay. Got it.
But one of the things that when I was in my 20s and 30s, I've struggled with my weight my whole life. My first year of law school, I'm an attorney. My first year of law school, I gained 50 pounds. Literally had finished up Weight Watchers my last year of college. Dropped down to probably like a size 6. I've never been a very skinny person. Started law school, and by the end of first year law school, I ballooned to like a size 16.
So you gained 15 pounds during.
50.
Oh, that's what I meant. In my head I had 50. So you gained 50 pounds in law school. Can you tell me when you started to actually feel that your body needed to be fixed? How old were you when you not necessarily started dieting, but when did you say my body needs to be fixed? There's something wrong with me.
Very like 10, 11.
10 years old. Okay. So then when did you
struggled with her weight, and she told me she said it laughingly, but she said, when you were born, you were so fat that the doctor picked you up by the roll of fat on your neck. You're going to struggle with your weight your whole life, just like your mother.
Got it. So you were stigmatized early from your own mom. Okay. So when did she first put you on a diet? I mean, it sounds like she was constantly probably on a diet too. On and off. So you were raised really to believe that food was dangerous, but yet at the same time, food was really important.
Yes, and we had a family restaurant. So I grew up in Ireland, and I've been over here 30 years, but grew up in Ireland, and my dad was hospitalized for malnutrition when he was about 6 years of age. Grew up starving. I mean, hunger was...
Yeah, he was in poverty? Poverty,
yeah.
Okay.
And so his way of showing love was he fed us. So he would,
of course.
I remember my mom, I even remember this vaguely, but I was maybe about 2 years old, and my dad had insisted that I eat a bowl of scrambled eggs. And I didn't like eggs. To this day, I don't like eggs. I make myself eat egg whites on HGG, but I don't like eggs. So he put the bowl of scrambled eggs in front of me, and I said, like 2-year-old, I don't like that. I don't want that. And apparently, he put the bowl of eggs out for me at every meal for nearly a day and a half until finally my mom said, enough is enough. This is child abuse.
Yeah, good for her. Yeah. Well, and he was projecting his own feelings of poverty onto you, and then probably thought you were an ungrateful little bitch, even though you're a 2-year-old being normal.
Just so you know, my dad passed last year. My mom 6-7 years ago. They were my best friends.
Oh, so that right there is going to be a huge trigger to inflammation right there.
Yeah, and my sister 10 years ago. And so in the last 12 years, I have... Sorry.
No, this is a huge issue you need to talk about. This is a big deal. I'm like frantically writing notes here because what you're giving me is the real issues underneath all of this. Your issues with weight aren't that big of a deal. You're really dealing with the real issues. Your weight isn't a real issue. We're making that up. This is a real issue underneath all this.
Thing is is that, in my 20s, everything that went wrong in my life, it was my weight.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, so I met my new husband in 2012, and when I met him, I was, sure, maybe 45 pounds lighter after a very successful HCG round.
Yeah.
And I was a single mom, 2 kids,
man. Okay.
ex-alcoholic husband.
Yeah.
And yet I was doing great. And I say that to say that in the past 5 to 6 years, if you were an outsider looking in at my life, you would say, wow, I got one of the top 100 women lawyers in California as a recognition, and my career is at the peak. I have, this very crazy blended family, but on the outside looking in, everyone would say, oh, look at her, blonde hair, blue-eyed kids, what a beautiful family. Truth is that I've got 3 kids with very special needs, PTSD. I have 2 adopted, 2 bio, 2 stepkids.
Got it.
There's a lot of chaos in my life, but I'm a very resilient person, so a lot of people complain that I make my life look easy. The side effect is that the weight keeps creeping up because that's how I, quote, reward myself for, whatever, you fill in the blank.
Well, I could, and that is also an indication of someone whose ultimate survival mechanisms are, you're in survival crazy mode, which is how people accomplish as much as you are. It's actually amazing to observe the potential of the human being under fight or flight. The problem, however, is that your food is probably the most foundational securing mechanism to our survival wiring. Millennia of evolution has brought it to that, and we can't take that away. It's ingrained in my wiring, your wiring, and everybody I work with's wiring. And so how do we work with that when your life is the way it is, and there's...
Right, and will be my youngest
for a while.
8,
Yeah.
my oldest is 14.
Yeah. So the only thing we can do is the mediary in between the real life reality and your response to it is perceptual. So the work that I do with everybody is perceptual more than it is anything else. And
so my goals are, number 1, I really do want to get out of inflammation, and I have found in the past I feel better when I do HCG. While I'm on it, I literally have... Today's the first day I've woken up probably in 6 months without hives.
Reduce info. Okay. Well, and the thing with keep on going. I'm taking notes, but I can explain that to you. It's not just HCG. It's the actual body sensitivity and what it needs to. I mean, if you're in that state of inflammation at your normal point, you're going to need to reduce food because your body's wired to become highly sensitive to food under those environments. And so the HCG protocol is like, well, of course she needs to be in a third world environment to match her inflammation, because that's how inflamed she is based on her psyche, and her reality is third world reality. So your food, so that would make sense why any type of starvation process would create a balance. But the problem is that it triggers your primal need to feast.
Right, and I was really listening to a video you had yesterday about that, where the irony being that when you label foods as bad, I'm allergic to a lot of foods. Like I can't have gluten without completely turning into...
If you're inflamed, if you're naturally inflamed, it's not the gluten, it's your body that is responsive to it. So that's one way to look at it. The diet industry is always fear-mongering that it's the food, never really addressing the fact that the people who are in fight or flight are highly responsive to all food. So those foods are like really good for people who are chilled out, don't have issues. When someone...
Certain foods that are way worse, like tomato sauce, vinegars.
Yeah. Well, and you're going to be... And it changes, too, with your menstrual cycle.
It does.
I know.
Absolutely.
Because you're in the moon and all that stuff.
I was listening to one of your videos yesterday where you're saying that, the more food you crave, the more the most food that you're craving are the ones you think you're going to be deprived of.
Probably. The psychological... clutchingness to food that's going to go away. That's that primal urge. That we can't get rid of that.
Right, exactly. And then, so there's already me. When I go into a social situation, there's many times that there's just foods I can't have to start with. Like I look around, And so you start getting into this deprivation kind of mentality of, why can all these people who aren't working as hard as me, and it's a victim mentality,
Yeah.
why can they all have corn and wheat and wine? I can't have wine. Sulfites drive my body nuts. Why can they all have that and look skinny? And gosh, I can't even have all of that. And
oh yeah. Well, and that mentality is super. Well, that is self-defense. That's self-defense. So it's not a personality trait. You're actually that's a form of self-defense in survival mode. So we all would be that way under certain circumstances. So that's something to really open your mind to, is that you're human, and some of these positionalities are very much so how you're wired under certain viewpoints. And so when and what's amazing about that viewpoint, it is highly inflammatory because you're in a position of self-defense and it's fascinating to me because it's in a position of helplessness, and also feeling deprived means that something has been taken from you. So again, it's like I have to defend myself. And so when you go to that position, our natural response would be, and it would make sense, to find a way to compensate. And so you're going to compensate yourself. That's the only way to manage that and create equilibrium in that space to where you can calm your brain down.
And then I find there's kind of shame and kind of embarrassment that, people say, oh, would you like this or that? I'm not saying I can't have it because I'm actually trying to lose weight. Most of the time I say I can't have it because I don't want to blow up like a giant hive. And so I see them looking at me like, well, she can't have that, and that. Why is she so big? And of course that's me projecting my inner dialogue onto them.
It is.
But
for sure.
But it's just that kind of like, well, gee, I eat organic. I don't do massive amounts of quantity foods, but I'm a highly sedentary job. I sit at my desk all day. From the minute I get up till the minute I go to bed, it's kids or work. There's not a lot of leftover for me, which is what I'm trying to change right now. And so it's kind of interesting what way you kind of wear it on the outside. You can't hide it, but it's an indication that your life is not in a good place. You're
yes, but it's not worthy of stigma. I mean, this is where we have to dismantle some of your belief systems, that you've held on to, and they may stem from childhood. Your intellect, your wisdom is going to say, well, that's ridiculous. But the truth of your emotional sense of security is latching on to this idea that thinner people are safer people. They're more secure people. There's that survival orientation around you're more welcomed, you're more loved, you're more, there's all those underlying belief patterns that are probably there that keep you in
and the
threat.
Opposite. I have this, when I've looked at it, I'll sometimes stereotype thin people as not being as empathetic, and not
totally.
As warm, not being as friendly, being more cold. And then what's my hidden agenda for not being thin? It's because I don't want to become like that.
Yeah, and that again is your projection. That is the narcissism that's being projected onto people who you think they're better than you. So that is absolutely totally. But it is true in your belief pattern. So you project, that's how that happens. You believe that to be true. It becomes something that your brain is wired to, especially if you think it's a threat, right? So go into that. If that is, as being seen as inferior is threatening, your whole brain is going to hone in on tunnel vision on that concept. And that's where your state of paranoia comes in. Symptoms of that. We don't know this is going on when we're living in it. It's not like you're sitting there going, oh wow, there's my, paranoia around, being seen as inferior, which really comes down to rejection, abandonment, and disapproval. You're not doing that. You're just going off of these feelings as if it's real and true, and the brain responds, your adrenals respond, your everything responds, your hair stands up on end, your blood sugar skyrockets. You don't even have to eat. And so that's another thing. I don't know if you've watched any of my recent YouTube videos where I talk about survival mode and fight or flight and how that impacts your endocrinology.
I do. I've got a couple of certificates in brain development because of my kids. I know a lot about the pons level of the brain and the fight flight, and there's also the freeze and the fawn.
Totally, but how your endocrine system reacts in terms of like your blood sugar skyrockets. Your body completely responds. Your need for your gut totally stops digesting.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, at the heart of it all is the gut's not working.
Yeah. Well, if you've been in this state for a chronic period of time, you're going to have horrible digestive problems. That have nothing to do with food.
Yeah. So I think that my goal is yes, all the reasons I want to be on HGG is because physically I feel better when I'm on it. Life is simpler. It takes away a lot of the emotionality about food choices.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's safe if you feel like you're losing weight. You're actually in your cave. You feel safe.
Yeah.
And that's a real issue that's going to come back to blow up in your face if it's not addressed.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so the thing I don't want to have happen is get addicted to the concept of I'm losing weight and get infatuated with that. So then I create the opposite fear of gaining weight.
Well, yeah, I love that you just brought that up. That's a good sign because you're at least aware of that possibility. And so you don't necessarily need to fear that it's going to happen because you're aware. So we just need to kind of update your hard drive on what you're aware of and what you don't need to be afraid of anymore. It'd be like, I'm afraid I'm going to get married to another alcoholic. What's the likelihood you're going to do that again? No, because you have the discernment and the radar and the awareness,
And then when I go all the way into that fear or of regaining the weight, I was having this conversation with myself. I commute about 55 minutes a day, so that's my alone time, my only alone time.
Yeah.
And I was saying, well, what's the worst case scenario if you regain the weight? Well, you've been there, and you haven't died. You have still had career success. You've still been able to earn enough money to take care of your family. You've still had friendships. You've still, had. So I was like, okay, so let's let that fear dissipate. That it's not about the weight. It really is about, for me, feeling physically better because I am in survival mode.
You are.
That's the thing that needs to be addressed because
good job.
I likely will be in survival mode for the foreseeable 5, 6, 8 years.
Well, if we can change your perception, even if you're living in drama and chaos, we can change how you perceive things, you're going to be in less. You'll be less sensitive. So we can look at it like there is a point at which, the primitive part of us, why is it that someone can be so quickly triggered and someone isn't? And a lot of it has to do with perception of yourself and then the environment. So the beautiful thing about this is we can say if you don't change your perception, what you just said is correct. Mm-hmm. It will not go away. It will constantly be here, and we can, distract, and you can deny, and you can do all of those mechanisms, right? And you're still going to be inflamed because your trigger is always going to be there, So we can go into your basic self-concept, and that's what we can simplify it by saying your self-concept is a truth to your survivability, right? Mm-hmm. Who am I in relation to life and what it's about, but it also is a tribal pack animal in relation to other human beings, because that's a huge trigger to most people. And it sounds like you've been dealing with that since you were a child.
Yeah, and right now, if I'm kind of, again, just being raw, I'm mother to everybody, mother at home, mother at work. I lead a team at work. I sit on the management committee of my firm.
Yeah.
I'm in such a mothering and leadership role in every area of my life. And when my mom passed, I felt that, the one person who would say, what about you? Passed.
Yeah,
and I know that's not true. I know that I am playing that role to myself to some degree, or else I wouldn't be on the phone talking with you right now.
Yeah.
But my perception is that I take care of everyone who takes care of me. Nobody takes care of me. And I know that, like, intellectually, I know that's not true because my husband, makes me lunch every day and asks me, is this HCG compliant? And, does really kind, nice things for me. Mother's Day, I got a massage. And, so I know it's not true, but that's we're talking about perception.
Oh, yeah. Beliefs underneath it all,
There's a lot of martyrdom going on.
Okay.
I lost my dad, my sister, my mom in the last 12 years. I had a stillborn baby. My marriage ended. And so that's a lot. that I use to identify who I am.
Yes.
And I don't shift that. I'm going to continue to have this very hypersensitive body. You
are correct. And you have to go back, and it doesn't mean we have to go through and peel off the fucking onion. That's a lot. That's not necessary. What we've got to be able to do is just look at your self-concept. What changing that does is it actually changes how you perceive your history. So we don't have to go through and unravel each thing. All we got to do is go into your own self-concept, change that, and that literally changes. Oh, I never saw it that way. I've always thought it this way. Well, that's because you were in self-defense. If you don't have to defend yourself, all of a sudden you're going to have more context that is more wide-ranging and has more depth. So wide-ranging depth of context, as you're aware of as a lawyer, is a big, big deal. Looking at it from, different perceptions. And sometimes as a child and as you're growing up as an adolescent, we internalize certain beliefs, and once they're internalized, it's kind of becomes unconscious.
Right.
And so, however, if you believe those things, especially if it's dogmatic, so one of the beliefs you're probably holding on to is what I call thin supremacy. Your mother believed it. There's a huge amount of people in our current culture who believe in thin supremacy. Like white supremacy, it's a similar dogmatic, narcissistic belief system around being superior than others and others being inferior. And if you internalize that at some point, you believe it, you hold yourself to it. Even if you don't hold others to it, you're holding yourself to it because it's become a personal survival mechanism. Those things have to be questioned, and it's going to create cognitive dissonance. Because it's my survival weapon. It's a shield. And if I question the shield, then, oh shit, I might have to put it down and then deal with what I'm afraid of, right? And ultimately, it's not necessarily what you're afraid of. It's your sense of lacking capacity that is underlying that victim position. Because you wouldn't feel like you were a victim if you felt capable. I'm not capable, therefore I am powerless to what is happening to me, and it is inferior.
Except in other ways, I feel incredibly capable.
Yeah, but yeah, of course. So you need to look at where you're struggling. Where you're struggling. Yeah, I mean, this isn't. Yeah, because in different areas, you're probably way more relaxed, way less self-defensive, way more open-minded. And we can say in those areas, you're clearly not threatened. But in certain areas, there is a deep animal threat going on that is coming from more than likely some form of programming and brainwashing that you've never questioned.
Right, which goes back to, again, I do feel like a victim of my body. Why is it so hypersensitive? Why do others get to eat all these things?
And that's just one layer of fear thoughts, right? That's just one fear of all layers of fears, and that's a superficial one. If we go deeper, there's more to it than that. That was like a layer one, an outer layer victim position. Yeah.
And don't I deserve to be able to eat normally like everybody else? And I'm not even talking about gluttonous eating.
Of course. Of course, it's relative.
Without turning into a giant hive, or being able to not have swollen feet for 3 days. That kind of. So I do have a very big kind of I'm a victim about my body.
Yeah, well, and that's very tunnel.
Not just limited to weight.
Yeah.
It's the hypersensitivity.
Yeah, and that's super tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Like you're not seeing past, and the awesome thing is you're aware it's tunnel vision. How do we get that? How do we get that to go away? Well, that's. If you believe in thin supremacy, it's impossible.
Yeah, and it's not even so much about thin. I mean, I'm okay being in a larger body. I have the clothes that fit that body.
It's just thinner. It's a relativeness.
It is a relative.
Yeah, that's why I say thin supremacy, but it's also a thinner than I am. Doesn't matter where you're at. It always needs to be thinner, and that is thin supremacy.
Which is also then, I told you that I had gone for this executive wellness exam.
Yeah, that was awesome, by the way. That was a killer exam. Was that a VO2 max exam that they put you on?
Where they put the mask on.
Yeah, and then they put you on a treadmill, and yep, I've done that before. It is painful.
It is.
No.
And I totally was did it in a very, because it's an executive wellness exam, and I paid a premium for
Yeah.
it, and I wanted 2018 to start out with this focus, but they didn't shame me. I felt shame.
I kind of, yeah, I when I sent you that response, I was like, okay, it's really common to be shamed, but if you believe in that shit, you're the asshole.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
they were very kind. They
Yeah.
were like, wow, looking at your life, and they
Yeah.
took a complete history of my family and all of that. They're like, yeah, looking at your life, you've got a lot. Let's be incremental and gentle
Yeah.
with you.
Well,
Right
let
now,
me.
walking for you would be a great accomplishment.
Yeah, your metabolism is rocking, man. It is a rocking metabolism.
So what does that mean? I was really
just means that it just means that your body's energy expenditure is really high, and that would make sense for all the energy that you actually have in a day. Mm-hmm. Like you're super high energy, and some of that comes from the fact that your fight or flight is on fire. And the good news is your fight or flight is more in the fight zone than it is flight zone. The flight zone is for someone who feels really incompetent, someone who is afraid of their own weakness. They go into, hiding, shrinking, denial, that type of, and you're not that, no, you're a little higher energy fight or flight. It's still lower states of consciousness, but it's more energized, which means you're willing to fight, and you're scrappy, and you're willing to dig holes and stay up all night. And I mean, it is ragey. Rage is inside there somewhere.
Oh yeah, I do all-nighters in April.
Oh my God. I'm feeling for you right now, because you shouldn't live like this, and you're living in it. But that's why so many people in it can be highly successful. It doesn't mean they're happy people. It just means they're highly successful.
I would love a little bit more balance.
Yeah.
I would love, I definitely would love to have a feeling of more balance. I mean, it's great, and I feel very, I was just talking about how I feel a victim of my body. On the other hand, I'm incredibly grateful that if I need to pull all-nighter, you know how to
do it. That's actually really interesting. I have also felt that way, only because I've been in PTSD and fight or flight before myself, and how to activate that. Once you kind of know how to get out, there's I could go back in, and it comes at a cost. It comes at a big cost. I'm super hyper focused. I sacrifice a lot of other things around me. My kids don't get the same attention, but I'm capable of getting something done in a kind of an obsessive way. You become obsessive, but you could also be an expert at something. You become really, really good at.
One of the reasons that I'm asked to do so much in my job is because they know if they give it to me, I'll get it done.
Yeah, and you'll do a good job at it too.
Right.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, but that comes at your sacrifice. If you can't balance, if you don't have balance, the key is, how do you make balance? I think it would be to your advantage if we can get you out, because then you'll have this a relative perspective around what you could do differently. It doesn't always have to be on. There's a I like to think of it like a dimmer switch. If you can learn how to do this, you're going to be able to teach your kids. You're going to be able to really go into the what turns it down. And what turns it down, you could say, is coping mechanisms, but that's superficial.
Right.
And you're still stuck in it. Now you're a slave. You become trapped to the mechanism that you're using to trick yourself into thinking that you're safe, as a human. And that's really what it comes down to. If we break this down to the fundamentals, it's fear of death, and what you've symbolized death, what's threatening you. That's what all of it is. All of it is fear of death. So we can look at shame. That's symbolic of shunning, being abandoned and rejected, which is highly triggering as pack animals, considering our likelihood of living and surviving is much higher in a tribe. That's evolutionary psychology looks at that. That we're wired to want to be closer to people, and to want to feel valued, and to feel that we have something to give. That's where I'm assuming your main trigger is.
Yeah, I mean, as you say it, I don't that's it. I'm not thinking I'm really afraid of being rejected by people.
You are, in terms of your beliefs around body image, so you're not seeing that?
Body
Yeah, I mean, you're not looking at your own trigger. You're looking outside of what's inside you, and you're seeing you're seeing
So you're saying that deep down,
you're
what
scared.
I should consider is I'm scared that people will reject me because of my body size.
Well, yeah, that's simplified, right? It has a lot to do with being alone. Being seen as inferior is probably a big trigger for you. She's inferior. She's not good enough. There is a degree of fear associated to not being lovable or seen that you're inferior. That's driving a lot of your compensatory behaviors.
Right.
To prove to yourself you're not, but in reality, you're just coping because you truly believe in there that that is a flaw that makes you inferior. And so you have to look at some of the standards that you're holding yourself to that you might be praising. You might be putting on a pedestal and not realizing that what that does is trap. You're in a trap, so you're stuck.
Well, yeah, I mean, I praise myself for being able to cope with huge amounts of stress, huge amounts of, I take very sophisticated problems and come up with, elegant solutions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a problem solver, able to deal with my kids in a way that most people would say you need to put that one in a residential facility, and
Yeah.
so I do put myself on a pedestal for the problem solving, and I see that it's
Okay, that's pride.
I'm putting myself in the pit for my body.
Yeah, well, the pride or the inflated state, right? Because that's what you're describing is there's pride and inflation around what you're attaching to your capacity.
Yeah.
That is inflammatory.
Okay.
And there's a big downside to it because you have to keep on doing it and you have to prove yourself and you have to have the outcome. So chances are there's a lot of controllingness around it. And that comes at a high downside for the people being controlled.
So you're saying that the mind-body connection is that the more I inflate myself over, look at me, I'm such a great problem solver, look at me, I can handle great amounts of stress.
If you rely on that, yeah.
I'm causing body inflammation with that perception.
Yes, and it creates, anything that's in survival mode is inflammatory. It's supposed to work that way. And it's not something to judge. To me, it's amazing. It's mechanisms that are promoted that are meant to do this. Like what you're doing is actually huge, and it can be highly, again, the output the energy and the output that you are capable of in that type of position is massive, right? I mean, look at I study. I don't know if you heard any of the sessions where I talk about one of the gurus. I love to study his work. His name is Dr. David R. Hawkins, and he created the map of consciousness, and he studied survival mechanisms. He studied all sorts of stuff, and he, for decades, this guy is just genius level of guru enlightenment. Amazing. And the way he created the map of consciousness, what I'm trying to do currently is try to understand it and correlate it to survival mechanisms. And he did it, but he also, the language he used was psychiatric language with Buddhist language with Christian language, and it can get a little to me, it's really hard to understand when he starts to change his verbiage. That's just me, right? I wish he would have been more sciencey, but he was trying to get out of that shit when he started to publish his books. He was, he had published orthomolecular biology with Linus Pauling, and then he moved on, right?
Right.
Anyways, his work would say, so I'm referencing not just my own experience in these mechanisms, but helping others, but also trying to integrate some of his language and descriptions. And so when you're talking, the pride state is actually really high. It's the highest survival mechanism, but it is still in the lower state of primitive functioning. So the benefit of it when you're in that pride state is massive when it comes to output, but it comes at a very high cost, which is you got it. You're trapped in a mechanism. And everything you have to do to just keep yourself at 0 point. You're not even getting benefit. You're at 0. But you have to do all this work. And it's fatiguing. Eventually you fatigue. And the downside of this is the big downside besides the fatigue. Physically, that you exhaust. And then when that happens, you are walking on eggshells around shame, embarrassment, hiding, shrinking, and you're going to do it in a more intense way because of the pride you've taken in your expenditure, not realizing.
Well, the funny thing is that the pride is what I tell myself to keep going. That's the irony here.
And that is a bigger trap. That's the narcissism.
So what's interesting is that, you know, you see what's in front of you. You have to do it. So how do you talk yourself into continuing going? You say, this is important work. They need me.
Yeah.
So you tell yourself that so that you can keep going, but then the downside is that
you're a slave
in the pride, and then
and you're a slave to it.
Yeah, and so then you're saying you said the pride is all part of the fear.
Yeah, it is. Okay. And you become a slave to it.
So I need to.
It's like a weapon. Think of it. It's not a shield. It's a weapon.
Have you heard of Dr. John DeMartini? He does. He teaches a method to balance out your perception so that you don't get caught up in cycles of like infatuation or resentment. So what I'm hearing I need to do is to, on a more daily basis, really not get so caught up in the pride and balance out my perception so that I'm bringing more conscious what's really going on.
Yes, I love what you just said. Yeah. Yeah, it really is a matter of recognizing this is a survival mechanism and it's not special. You're just suffering in it. Your capacity is really high. That's a benefit. That's the upside. The downside is you're trapped. Yeah, you can't not do it. Even if it's killing your body. And it's a form of slavery. And even if you're promoted, you're given all of this positive reinforcement, it becomes a form of slavery. And if you stop, there's codependency here, which is super toxic because they need me. What are they going to do without you? Well, then they're going to have to be normal. You know, why can't normal be okay? So it really comes down to this. There's so much conversation just to give perspective. Like, why are we promoting narcissistic belief patterns and ways of being and promoting people when it requires that they live on drugs, that they are literally suffering psychologically just to be promoted and to be seen as special? And why are we doing that? No wonder this country is like suffering from abuse, drug abuse and all sorts of stuff,
Right. So tying the survival back to the eating.
The eating to me is like the easiest thing for us to address. That to me is like, okay, that's so easy. But what's underneath that is not. There's some complicated shit down there. And because that has to do with self-concept. Your issues with food are totally forgivable and understandable and would be expected. If you take a step back, you're going to hear that and go, she's right. That is no shit.
I mean, I would tell you probably, on any given day, I would say, well, that's the worst thing I do to myself, given everything I'm dealing with.
Right? That's the superficial bullshit that we could say, of course she's going to go to food because she's, first of all, depriving herself and now she's feeling pissed off about it. No shit. You're going to go get your food and that's understandable. I would do the same thing, but we really need to look at.
I really want to get to a point where, though, I am just seeing food for what it is. It's a form of fuel for our body.
And pleasure, and really important part of pleasure.
Yeah.
There's more to it than that.
Right. It's fuel, but also there's some pleasure, but that it would be still nice not to have so much brain noise around that.
Right. Oh my God, you just said that right. The word you just used is on point. It is brain noise. It's mental baggage. Mental. Yeah. That part, to me, is the hardest part when you're dealing with this shit.
That takes up energy.
Oh, yeah, it does. Well,
food. I mean, how many times do I spend on any given day when I'm not doing HCG, which actually really reduces my brain noise, thank God.
For sure, because you're losing weight. That's for sure.
But it's not just that. It's simple.
That's the foundation. Then it goes up.
I'm not going into every single thing saying, what will I eat? What won't I eat? Having that whole diabolical dialogue with me.
Well, all of that is in relation to you losing weight. If you got to go underneath all that. So all of it. See, this is where your dogma you're not questioning because it's now unconscious. So I'm talking about it. That's what it is.
Okay, so bring it up.
Because you wouldn't be having this dialogue. This is why it goes away. Because you're losing weight and you can rely on the protocol. And it's like sitting back and paying an accountant to do your accounting. It's like, holy shit, it's the best thing ever. I can take a break. I'm relying on this protocol. It's working. It's controlling everything. I have nothing to do but just do what I'm told. And I can rely on the fact that I'm losing weight. If you come off of the HCG, what's going to happen, and you've kind of connected those dots already, this conversation is going to start coming back up. All of a sudden, you're going to start having to think, I can't eat this, I shouldn't eat that, and it's going to get incessant. The mental, and it's going to be incessant. And that comes from your threat, the underlying threat of fatness, which is, and what you've attached to that. So it's not just fatness, it's the symbolism that you've attached to it, the meaning that you've attached to it, the hopes and dreams and what you want and what you're gambling on, right? That's what complicates it too. It's not just weight loss. It's like, I wanted to do this and I want to do that and I need to do this and it's going to help me with the inflammation and blah, 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 blah. So you've attached the benefit to it, which means when you come off the protocol, which is kind of keeping you protected and giving you that, I can just rely on this to work because it's that easy. It's giving you a break. It's really nice, isn't it? It's kind of fancy.
No, it is.
Yeah.
It's nice to have the break.
Yeah, it is. So imagine that right now you're not losing any weight.
It would also be nice to live in the real world without all that brain.
I totally agree with you. And that would be, that's the goal. That's what I want for everybody I work with, whether they're on the protocol or not, is to remove that insanity from their life, because it is a form of suffering. You're suffering. You're devoting life energy and consciousness to picking apart what's in your food as if it's the bear in the room, if it's the cougar, as if it's going to kill you. I mean, that is your threat. And it's only threatening you because you have some inner belief you're not questioning that is unconscious about your weight. You wouldn't do this if you didn't have a weight trigger. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is just so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. Give you a if you were not losing weight right now, if like you no weight was being lost at all, would that change your state of relaxation?
About the HCG?
Yeah, just that nice idea that I don't have all that freaking mental baggage going on right now. Would that change if you stopped losing weight? Just go into that and tell me what truth comes up.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious truth is that I still get very attached to what the number says on the scale.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. So the answer would be, while I would appreciate feeling better, I'd still be like, what the fuck's going on with the scale?
And then you'd start to have that dialogue again. So that's what I meant. So that's the part you're not consciously aware of. You're consciously aware and intellectually aware of the chip about food.
Yeah.
What you're not seeing, because it is positioned and locked in, is the angle you're looking at it from. Why is it at that angle? Well, because your opposition is weight gain. Everything is about not being fatter. You need to be thinner. So it's biased. So you're not going to see it.
Yeah. No, I have no question. I mean, I absolutely want to be thinner. You know, I've wanted that since I can remember because that was something that was put in my head. Yeah.
At a very young age. Yeah.
At a very young age.
And from people you love and care about too. So you don't.
Yeah, and I also heard
it's innocent.
From my dad, your sister got the beauty and you got the brain. So there was that double whammy of
like there's something
with my weight and I'm going to be intelligent. Which what a gift! I was told I'd be intelligent. I am.
Okay.
But on the other side, you're not going to be that attractive.
Which means, what's the symbolism of that? You're going to be alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's underneath all this.
No, I don't know if it's going to be alone. I'll never be good enough.
What's underneath? What is the point of that?
People will be with me, but not necessarily because they want to be. Because of what I give them.
And so what's underneath that? If you don't give them what they want, if you're not whatever they need, what happens to you? What's underneath all that?
They could leave.
And you will be what?
Alone.
You're human. And that was very predictable. You are not seeing it. But that is, everyone's wired that way. We're pack animals. There's nothing you can do about it. Unless you get over your fear of death. Because it triggers fear of death. And it's, again, this has been studied.
Which is interesting because I would say I've had the privilege of being with 5 people as they took their last breath. My niece, my grandmother, my sister, my father, and my mother. And the moment of death and that process of leading up to it, I don't have a lot of fear about that. I've had a very unique experience that way.
Yeah, yeah, and my mother passed a couple years ago, and I
more concrete for me. It would be fear of maybe not existing.
Yes. Oh my God, you're hitting the nail on the end. You're ready for this work. You are primed. You're really ready to go here. Yeah.
Not being meaningful.
And not only that, would you agree? It's because I understand what you're saying. You're not afraid to die.
I'm not afraid of death.
No, that's easy. That's easy, right? Because that's acceptance. Once you accept it, you just go. Okay, that comes down to fear of, and it's out of control. So this is where, if you're actively dying and you're aware you're actively dying, it's very peaceful. It can be very, very peaceful, right? Because you process, you go through those stages of grieving, and you go through the process, and it's beautiful. It's actually very, very peaceful. However, if someone is going to murder you, is it peaceful? No. You go into fight or flight. And so your fight or flight response is feeling out of control, that it is a choice, and this choice is being removed, and it's a threat. So it comes from, there's a difference between an inner awareness of dying versus a threat you could die, and the fear of whatever that is and what you've attached to that. So the outside source is what we have to resolve. And this is where you go into the vulnerability of not just dying, but rejection, abandonment, disapproval. That's that third hierarchy of need. Have you watched any of the videos where I go into Dr. Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how this applies?
I'm familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I haven't heard you talk about that yet.
Well, it's super basic, right? This is so fun. This is fundamentals. Yeah, and it's almost all the way up to the inspire too. Yes, and I love his work. I found that Maslow's hierarchy of need paired with Dr. Hawkins' map of consciousness is really fascinating, because the way that Maslow, he described it is in a pyramid, right? That our brains, through evolutionary psychology, evolving to survive, which is the goal, has become highly predictable, because we're like other animals on this freaking planet. And so when we look at human behavior, the fundamental idea is that there are certain needs that are way more important than others in terms of life and death. So our brains and psyche is wired to prioritize those needs over the less important needs. And so there is a pyramid or a hierarchy. Our psyche is fundamental. Like, and just think of it this way: the more important the psychological need, the more inflammatory your brain is when it's under threat. Okay, so think of, and not only that, but psychologically more sensitive too. Okay, so the more important, the more psychologically sensitive you are, and the more inflammatory the brain responds when there's a threat. Did that make sense?
No, say it again, please.
So in terms of what we need to survive, the more important the need is, the more sensitive we are to it psychologically. Okay, and the more inflammatory the response is when it's under threat.
So let's take a concrete example of that.
Well, I'm gonna go there. Just give me a second. Okay. So the foundation of your psychological survival mechanism, the most sensitive mechanism, the most inflammatory mechanism is food, water, physiological.
Right.
Period. Most important. More important than your kids. More important than your husband. More important than your house.
Right.
Okay. So
the more I'm obsessing about those needs, the more inflammatory the response.
Correct. Yeah, and not only that, but your whole gut stops digesting, especially when your threat is not an animal, it's food.
And when I say the need, whether it's perception.
You got it. It doesn't matter if it's real or not.
So the more I obsess about food
and restrictions,
positive or negative, or restriction or deprivation
or
indulgence,
the worse it is. You got it.
The more inflammatory.
Yeah. Notice how simple it's like right in front of your fucking face. Why can't people talk about this? Well, because the diet industry is thriving, making trillions of fucking dollars telling you it's bad food.
Right, so that's the dilemma. So then the question is, what's the solution?
Well, we need to keep on going up the pyramid. So the second hierarchy of need is environmental, my home, my shelter, my healthcare, right? I need to get to a doctor. Do we have access to that shit? Yes. That is really important. What clothes do I wear to keep me safe from the elements? How do we keep my kids from getting diseases? Yes, those are all really important. The third hierarchy of need is probably where your actually source of the problem is, because you clearly don't have a problem with food. It's a perceived problem with food that is being constantly triggered. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you obviously have a problem with number one.
Mm-hmm.
It's obvious. Like, duh, no duh, right? But you don't live in a third world environment. You're clearly acting like you do, though. And you're confused by it because you don't live in a third world environment, but you're acting like you do. Okay. So to me, it's like, oh, you're doing exactly what you need to do. Everything's perfectly fine. Your issues with food aren't a problem at all. The problem is probably in the third hierarchy of need, which is the fact that our survivability does significantly increase when you are around people who love and support you.
So what's number 3?
It's like
family?
It is belonging. I belong. Yeah, it's our tribe. We're pack animals. It's we want to feel that we because it's hardwired into reality. I mean, they look at human beings and living in tribes of 20 and 30 people that if there was hardship, they would shun people. They would literally throw them out because they couldn't share the food if there was famine, and they had to get rid of people who were sick or had problems or were problem people. They couldn't feed them, and they would have basically shunning. They would shun. And this happened long enough that it's actually wired into our hereditary psyche.
So you're saying that you say my issue is number 3.
Yes.
Because of my fear of rejection over
probably your body. Yeah, that's one of them. That could be one. The underlying sense. So let me simplify this for you. If we look in terms of food, and they've looked at this further since Maslow, and it's still being studied and promoted, but they've made it better. Change sex to be much higher. It's not as necessary. We can
intimacy.
Yeah, that's way up there. It's not as important anymore. Whereas Maslow thought it was number 1. It's not. Right. Mm-hmm. Now we're seeing, but food, however, has really been looked at. So if the triggers to it are 1, do I have food today? Mm-hmm. 2, is there enough for my family, for me? Mm-hmm. So is there enough? So there's a sensitivity to understanding quantities. Okay. Can I get more? Can I recycle it? Can I get more? Is there more? Can I get more? Do I have the ability to get more? So the concept of time and access over time is actually really triggering. Mm-hmm. Right. So there's a time component with food that's really, really triggering.
Which is interesting because you just brought up a thought that I have quite a bit, which is when I'm done with it, then I can. When I'm done with this protocol, then I can.
Yeah, exactly. So you're constantly seeking, very animal. Can you see how it's so forgivable? Everything you're doing is like, you look like an animal to me. This is perfect. Yeah. You're doing a good job. Good job. Okay, the 4th one is really important. Is it safe to eat? That one we're really sensitive to it.
Is it safe to eat?
You got it.
That's a self-esteem?
No, is it safe to eat? Is the food safe to eat? That's the 4th trigger. Is the food safe to eat? Oh, yeah. It is.
My perception is a lot of food is very unsafe and threatening to me.
Well, yeah, and you've been indoctrinated for a long time about that, whether it's true or not. And then it becomes true because I want you to know something. So now we're going to look at Pavlov's studying on the digestive tract and fight or flight and the whole foundation of that science, which was like over 100 years ago, how the body responds under fight or flight reactions. So think about that first hierarchy of need as being highly sensitive. And the first thing that happens is your gut stops digesting, and it doesn't digest for hours. And you're having that response while you're eating a piece of bread. It's not going to digest.
Okay, so shifts the perception. It's not the food that's unsafe to eat. My gut isn't working. All food is going to be virtually intolerable. To some degree, yeah.
More things that need more time to digest you're going to have a very difficult time with that. Okay. Whereas, but what in general, what they found is, and they studied a lot back then. It's amazing that this stuff is so simple, so elementary, and it's like right in front of your face, and it's so easy. And why aren't they talking about someone's state of mind is actually fundamentally important to understand how they are digesting food. If this person, so they had one woman who they were studying in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and she had a very anxiety-ridden, very high, fear issues, and she had terrible digestion. And they noticed as they were studying her digestion over time is that when her husband was with her, her digestion was terrible. Nothing was digesting really. The food she had eaten the day prior was still undigested. She had bowel problems and all sorts of stuff. But when he wasn't with her, her digestion was like back to normal. Come to find out, her husband was an alcoholic. So
Yeah.
so they looked at like, wow, okay, so your response is an animal, and they found the most intense problems occurred with rage, anger, and fear. Those are the most intense. So when you're inflated and raging and hiding and complete and total shuddering, fear, and paralysis. Those are the two extremes.
That's the worst digestion.
Yeah, your pride and shame. Pride and shame. Pride and shame. You're going to have terrible, terrible digestion. And plus, your whole body, when you're highly energized like that, is actually promoting work, not eat. And so I'm not surprised you have digestive problems. To me, that's like, well, of course you're going to have digestive problems. That shouldn't be like, that's like, duh. It's another thing that's like, well, and then the diet industry is really, the way that they work is to promote restriction. So they're going to try to find a way to blame the food. They've made so much money blaming food over decades. You know, and because you can pay them.
I didn't have anyone really tell me to eliminate gluten. I made a correlation when I eliminated it. That when
you feel better.
I felt better.
Yeah, well, see, you can see that it would make sense under your body's state of being.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's why it would also make sense is that my list of foods that trigger or inflame me are getting more and more and more all the time.
Yeah. Well, and then it's going to snow. You can see it self-perpetuates and it actually gets bigger and bigger. And your triggers to binging are going to be a lot more sensitive. The trigger to eat is going to be really sensitive because you're really trying to just check the box on that first hierarchy of need. And when you do that, you're going to get a lot more gratification out of it. So you're sensitive to that pleasure response too, because your body says this is really important to survive. When you actually do what it says, you're going to get a big shot of narcotic brain activity.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
it has nothing to do with the food.
No.
It has to do with those primitive needs to feel safe from the threat of death. That is not in your mind. It's not, I'm going to die. But that's what's triggering. Yeah. You got it. Like you could die. And that ultimately, imagine too, when someone is put in a position, and they studied this with binge eaters, that the context of dieting changes their degree of binging. So it's not the food so much as it is the degree, the context for why they're depriving. So they took 3 groups. One group, they all had the same exact food restrictions. And one group was, the context was for fasting, for spiritual, personal, reason, had nothing to do with weight. The second group was about weight, to lose weight, and they were to eliminate all the food in their house and only have the food that they were to eat in their home, and the quantities and eating on that schedule. The third group were the same exact restrictions, but they were to have food all around them. They were to have not change anything. They were to go eat their food out in public with food everywhere. Which group do you think had worse binge eating issues?
Probably the third with the food.
You got it. Yeah, because of the perception. So what they described in that study is that there is this could be a direct link to defense mode around food deprivation, that we're wired to hide, seek, to take claim or ownership of food under threat. Whereas if it's a famine situation where there's no food for everybody, we don't respond that way. We don't go into self-preservation.
So to make it concrete, if I shift the perception that it's not the food that is unsafe, and I focus on understanding that the gut is inflamed, the gut isn't digesting because I'm perceiving that I'm constantly in survival, and I shift my perception of being in survival, then things calm down. It's not about the food being unsafe. It's just a kind of a, like you said earlier, kind of calm the whole thing down.
Yeah, but it doesn't. You don't work backwards to do this. It doesn't work that way. You have to go to this core, undo it, and then it just naturally goes away. I think that. So what I heard you is, if I do this, then I do that, then it should do this, and I should that. You're working backwards, but you're still inflamed while you're working backwards. So what we got to do is go to the core of the belief pattern, shut the fuck down, get it out. You know, get it out. It's like an exorcism. Get it out, and you'll notice that your issues with food just go away on their own. You don't.
What is the core?
The core would be that you are a piece of shit, inadequate loser. That's in there. That's in there. And obviously it's not around everything because you compensated. No, I'm not. I have this and that. But underneath you are trying to create balance between how crappy you feel in one respect and what you had to do to offset it.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
So a lot of people go, I'm a good person. Look at my success. It's like, well, right there, you're actually trying to justify with success why you're not sucky. So you've just coped and compensated, not seeing it.
Yeah.
So the question is this, going into my goal would be, let's go into the belief and really question it. Because if it's not true, what happens to all the compensations? And the need to rationalize, justify, organize, what happens to the need to make sure, that everything is better if there's nothing wrong. So going into what's wrong underneath it all and releasing that, and then to shift your level of consciousness. We don't have to change your environment. We don't.
No, I mean, it's number one, number three.
Yeah, and we're waging war on each other, and that's the sucky thing, is number 3 thinks that it's more important than number 1. I'm sorry, it's not. You're not going to change millennia of evolution in 2 decades. You're not going to do it. 50 years, and the diet industry is hugely the psyche of how they're doing it is promoting these issues. They're not aware of it. It's not like they know what they're doing.
Right.
They're just blaming you as a piece of shit loser who can't contain herself.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't buy into that. I see that my use of food makes perfect sense over the years.
Yeah.
I see that if it weren't for that coping mechanism, other things in my life that I perceived as more important, whether they were or not, my kids, my parents, being there for them when they were passing, food allowed me to do that.
I would agree. Well, because what it does is it secures your foundation and allows you to be energized above it, right? So that's how that works. That is Maslow's.
I don't want to completely discount that as something that didn't serve.
Yeah, well, you can see that if I'm dealing with a real trigger in that third hierarchy of need, I need to let go of this issue with food because I can't devote energy to it. That needs to be secure so I can devote it to the third one. And that's where, when real life shit occurs, why people get rid of their diet immediately. Because it's so dumb. You can only really go into that state of mind ultimately if you feel somewhat secure in those higher levels. Now, it's not necessarily intrinsic. It might be extrinsic security, meaning I got a crutch that's making me feel the idea that I'm doing better. Now I can go in, and restrict food and deal with the energy that it literally sucks from my brain and focus to get enough obsessive around it to make this work. Right? So when you're dealing with a real life trigger, it's like, no, I can't deal with that shit. So you let go of that food restriction, which gives your brain the ability to now work on these upper levels of problems. So when someone is having like...
It's a foundational issue, and until I shift the perceptions around food... Body image. That goes away.
Body image is number 1. Then the food will naturally change.
Right, so if I shift the perceptions around body image, which relates to the first level of need, then this issue won't fall apart in crisis in the future because that will be a foundation that's established.
You got it. Yeah, because you're no longer feeling the same threat with body image. That would be the goal, is that your body is no longer your biggest threat. And it's really a perceived threat. It's perceived threat, even though you do have physical manifestations of chronic problems now over a chronic period of time.
Right.
Those are things you have to surrender to get past it to what's underneath. I have clients who are 400 plus pounds. We have to get past that reality to get into, who you really are as a human being, and the willfulness to surrender and have the humility to, one, be okay with being flawed. And that's another issue that you might be fundamentally projecting into body image. So we could say you have a body image problem, but really it's a problem with the belief that if you're perceived as flawed, you're toast. And so for you, it's more important to, being flawed physically because of what you were taught and, innocently believed in.
Well, here's an example. I did a presentation at my firm on Friday, and I got a lot of praise and a lot of props for it. And oh my gosh, I didn't know you were so funny, and that was just so heartfelt. And all I could think about is, yeah, my face looks so much bigger. I've gained weight recently. This is the
oh, honey.
No, it wasn't all I could think about. That's not true. But
yeah, but that sucks.
It is interesting how I thought, here's more accurately what I probably was my inner dialogue. That's really nice. I wish I was 30 pounds lighter when I did that presentation, because this is really my first kind of, the entire company sees me as a member of leadership. And, gosh, I wish it had been, a month from now, or I wish it had been this from now, or I wish it had been, and it was all around body image.
Yeah, and that it's going to do something for you, like some fantasy mirage that you wish you could have.
Yeah. The truth is that it probably was much more real for people to say, wow, she's a normal human being. She clearly, has a fairly normal, if not overweight body, and she's very real about her kids and her struggle with her kids. Instead of me, connecting that that's not such a bad thing, it's funny how I was saying it could have been better if.
Yeah, that's the fantasy. That's what you're chasing. So that's like a mirage. And that's the mirage of like.
And it's not true. It's not true that it could have been better. It actually was just, it hit the right tone. It was exactly what was needed at the time. But I don't want to. But I want to be real. If you said, get to the core belief about body image.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of building on that. Does that mean that I fear that if I am not, that they'll reject me? That if I don't lose weight, they'll reject me?
Well, that's a pretty simplified. That's really simple, okay? Because I think it's more symbolic than that. I think it has more to do with yourself than others. So this is where it gets hard for people to see, because at some point you may not care what someone else thinks, but you're holding yourself to this concept, right? So it's really more about what you think is approvable than what someone else thinks. For you to be where you're at, you had to have gotten past what someone else thinks a long time ago.
Yeah.
So it really comes down to you having a form of Stockholm syndrome, where you're holding yourself to this douchebaggery. You're not holding other people to it. It's your own personal survival, your own concept of self. So you've identified yourself by that thinner mirage, and you want it.
The higher thin standard.
Correct. Yeah. So this is where you are, in effect, holding yourself to this concept. Even though everybody else gets grace, everybody else gets freedom, you're not necessarily shaming someone else because they have body fat. It's you that is being shamed, and you're the biggest asshole. Right? And so we have to go. That's why it's not as simple as saying, well, it's because you care what other people think. But in reality, it's what you think, but it's a self-concept that is biased towards what is believed to be superior, which is it's an idea that you are safe from rejection and abandonment if you are seen as superior. And so you're holding yourself to these standards to, in effect, to avoid the vulnerability of ridicule. But you're the one who's the asshole, And so that's why it's so hard to see. It's like it's inner self-concept.
It's not that I really am worried about what they say. It's more I'm thinking that, I won't be rejected. I won't be abandoned. I won't be meaningless if I can get there.
Yeah, if I feel good about myself. If I can do that, not realizing that you still are brainwashed. You're still using the thin supremacy concept. You're not the one that created that concept. It isn't really your concept, but so this is really common with for example, someone who is having interpersonal relationships issues, right? To seek some sense of autonomy. And to believe that by choosing to lose weight, I am taking care of myself. It is me, I'm doing it. But in reality, you're going to a cultural dogma, and then so you're not being controlled by another person anymore. You're actually being controlled by a system, thinking that it's yours. So you become, it's like not as obvious as a person is controlling me. You see what I mean? So it's not necessarily a person anymore you're afraid of rejection from. It's your own belief system that you hold yourself to. So it doesn't have to be a person you're afraid of. It can be a belief system.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because my husband likes me no matter what weight I am. My ex-husband didn't. My ex-husband was critical of weight, and
well, of course, he clearly had his own
right.
own shame that he was trying
and even
to.
though my current husband is very physically fit and takes care of himself, he's very kind, and it's like, I don't care what weight you are, I think you're sexy, and that was really hard for me at first because I relied on my ex-husband to be the additional critic to myself. And so, in a way, what being married to this man has kind of resulted in is that I realize it is all about myself.
Yeah, it's given you the space to realize this is your personal.
Yeah, this is all about me. Before I kind of knew he wasn't as overt all the time. There was times he would be over at my ex-husband and say, if you, our sex life would be better if you were X.
There's that blame and victim position, right?
And
codependency, really, because he's thinking that that's the codependency.
And we had a deal. I mean, I didn't say much about his drinking pre-kids if he didn't say much about my eating. It was kind of, I look back and I see the contract that was there. I'm not naive about that. And then when it became health and safety of my children, that contract ended. So I could see that. I could see the kind of relationship. But with my current husband, I want him to judge me. Because I don't want to take responsibility for that myself. But it goes to what you're just saying, which is it's not what other people are saying about me. It's what I think about myself.
Which isn't really actually your thoughts because you've been conditioned by programming.
They were conditioned
correct.
Early on, and
so it's called brainwashing.
Confirmed through various Weight Watchers.
You got it.
Stuff. I mean,
you got it. It's social dogma.
I once even did 30 days brown rice, nothing else, with some Japanese meditation master, and I gained it all back, as you can imagine. But so ultimately, I do know, and that's probably been a great gift for my husband as well, is that I do know that whatever I feel about my weight, it's all about me.
It really is. It's a self-concept, and this goes into your personal. Okay, so you brought this up a little bit ago, and this is ultimately, if we want to just go into where I direct the clients I work with and how I recovered and how other people have recovered from this, is to go into that extinction, the feeling of extinction. It's not just I'm dying, that's easy and that's peaceful. No, it's I'm going to not exist anymore. That's that primal, primitive, that's wired in there for a reason, and if you can transcend that, this is going to become a non-issue.
And when you say transcend that, I mean embrace it, say yes, we all will cease to exist.
Well, that's part of it. Yeah, that's one aspect. But going into the will, there's a willfulness that if you don't exist, this concept of me, because that's really what this is about, is your ego, the concept of me, my name, my persona, these things that I identify my life by, all of a sudden, go into the actual act of dying, that what happens to me and how I relate to this body when I die, right? There is that aspect that has to be opened up. But the willfulness to surrender what that is, even if you're not actively dying, the willfulness, and it's going to come across physiologically as if you're going to get murdered, because it is triggering that primal issue.
I'm having a hard time relating to that because I have such a vivid picture of, especially my mother, my sister, and my father, and what being with them at that point, especially my dad, because it's the most recent. He was such a willful person, walked every single day of his life until 15 days before he died, and seeing his process of surrendering, and
Yeah.
nobody would have described him as a gracious man. He was kind of an Irish man with a good temper, and but what's interesting is that he had no choice. And
well, that's different. That changes things.
I know, but at the same time as he had no choice, I heard him coming to peace with, well, I always wanted, if I was going to go, a brain tumor or a heart attack was what I wanted, a brain tumor will do, and it was a brain tumor.
Yeah.
And,
that's how my mom died.
Yeah. And he was very aware, and my mother was too, and my sister was too. I was very fortunate. They were all very aware of what was happening. My sister's was longer. She was 18 months, but my mom was 28 days. My dad was more like 14 days.
Oh my God. That is like, bam.
Yeah, pancreatic with my mom and this brain tumor with my dad.
Yeah.
But enough time for them to accept it.
Yep, and go through the process of it.
Say goodbye and
to surrender their identity and surrender to everything they're losing. So, this is very similar. So there is a similar process that you go through with this one. But because it's coming from an outside source, there is an aspect for some people, not everybody, some people it is terrifying. Because they're dealing with rejection, abandonment, disapproval, feelings of being shunned, shamed, embarrassment, and everybody's unique to really what's underneath all of that and how it manifests. For me, it was total and complete obliteration by suffocate. I mean, I was going to get it. To me, it was absolute murderous suffocation, heaved off a cliff, being completely dismembered. It was terrifying to surrender. Total and complete terror. Not everybody has that intense level of mechanisms and coping mechanisms surrendered all at once. Right?
So look at what the fear is of the process and the feeling of extinction.
Yeah, well, you eventually get to a place where you let go of your coping mechanisms and you go into what it is that they're serving, because they're serving something. You get something out of it, right? If you surrender what you're getting out of it, what's going to be underneath it is fear. That is going to start bubbling up. And then that fear actually has a message. There's a trigger. There's actual there's a story underneath that, where it is, what it's attached to, but you have to surrender your coping mechanisms to actually get down there. And that is not easy.
Right.
Because you get something out of it, especially the pride aspect. This is the hardest thing for people who get pride. And the good news is you've kind of identified that already.
Yeah.
And you can go, okay, I just got to, calm down the narcissism a little bit. Get into the truth of your reality. You're a fucking human. And all humans are capable of a lot under that environment. It's not special to you. Okay? That's hard to hear when you get pride out of something like that. But you got to be able to do it for yourself. And this is why it's so important.
No, I mean, I think I said to you, I wanted the straight talk.
Yeah.
And the no bullshit.
Yeah.
And I have enough people around me saying,
"You're amazing.
Oh my God, your life." All that stuff.
Well, underneath all that, you have these underneath issues you're aware of, and it's like, sure, okay.
When other people around you aren't saying it, guess who's saying the opposite? I am.
Yeah. Well, that's
to counteract all the people who say I'm great, I'm amazing, and I'm all of that. I'm saying I'm a piece of shit. I'm a loser. I'm a fake. I'm a fraud. I'm a phony.
Oh, yes. And that is underneath it all. That's the pride. That's the downside of the pride, is that it's a trap. It's superficial. It's usually conceived. So one way to look at this, on a side note, think of it like you have weapons in warfare. And you're taking pride over the fact that you have a beluga gun. I have these weapons. Are you really that strong if you got rid of those weapons? That's the truth. So when we get rid of all these coping mechanisms, the truth is still there. And that's what you have to stop repressing and hiding and trying to avoid and not looking at it. And so when we actually remove the weaponry, take off all your shields, what you're going to be is, it's going to be like a little girl in fear. That's what's underneath it all. And it starts to bubble up. And if these things go away, it's actually going to be threatening your identity, which is ultimately your ego or superego. That's what that is, right? That's our survival identity. And it's a concept of surviving that is superficially controlled. So if you get rid of the superficiality around it, the reality of where you're at is underneath all that. And there's more than one part that has to be addressed. It's not just fear of death by rejection, abandonment, and disapproval. You clearly aren't afraid to die, but death coming from outside of yourself is very different.
I don't think I'm afraid to die. I think I'm afraid of not being capable.
Well, I was going to that next. So there's that respect. Cougar's in front of me. A bear is coming, chase me. My child is going to die. There's all sorts of triggers to environmental threat. Then there's the most important, which is, can I handle it? And that ultimately is where the source of the problem is. And you just connected the dots.
Number 4, which is the self-esteem.
Well, you're not going to hit that because that's not authentic. It's not really self-esteem if it's pride esteem, if it's attached to weaponry esteem. You're never going to transcend that level of consciousness. You're never really going to get there. So what Maslow found is that when you have secured those things, your brain changes. Your brain completely changes and you become autonomous. That's where self-esteem exists. It's not attached to perceptual brainwashing or concepts socially. You know, like for example, I have great self-confidence with my religion. Is that really self-confidence?
No, because you're relying on a dogma.
Correct. So, or a social system that says, look at me, I'm superior with my grades. You know, it's like you're still attaching to something that isn't authentically real. It's a concept that takes a lot of work to accomplish, and now you're trapped continuously working at it. So you'll never get past those lower states of survival mode.
Right.
So to transcend that, you have to get rid of your goddamn weaponry and your coping mechanisms and actually address the inner sense of yourself that is not pride and separative and I'm better than you, and that's, you know, the core of survival, which is self-preservation. You got to get out of your own preservation. And the only way to do that is to be bare, buck-ass naked in your soul and face rejection, abandonment, and disapproval. That third hierarchy you need is huge. Because we don't have a real issue with food insecurity here with 1 and 2. There's no issue. It's all made up, right?
Right.
So you facing that third hierarchy of need, the willfulness to be shunned, seen as inferior, that takes a lot of humility. And the humility to be willful to do that. The willfulness and the humility in that process is and to go into that feeling of I can't handle it, and to actually do nothing about it. Right. So it's a lot of people go, well, I don't know if I can do it. Well, you know what? You can't. You have to do it with the can't feeling. You can't, because you're not going to get a sense of I can handle it because there's no concept of that yet. You're not even close to that. You're currently in a state of fight or flight. There is no awareness of what it's like to be out of it.
Right.
So you have to go into those feelings of inadequacy and accept that that's what it is. Maybe you are inadequate, and you go into acceptance, and to do that takes humility. Yeah. And loss. You have to let go of what you get out of being superior, seen as special. You have to let all that go, and that can come across as, you know, there's stages of it. Poor me. I'm going to be seen as ugly and inferior forever, you know. So you have to go through a process of letting it go and get to a place where you're like, hold on a second. It's all fake anyways. Why am I feeling sorry for myself? I'm getting rid of the fakeness. I'm getting rid of the trap. I'm getting rid of all of this self-inflation, inflammation in the brain, the survival mechanisms. I'd rather be homeless. I'd rather be alone. And once you transcend that, there is this space that Maslow believed to be, there is the self-esteem where you start to become more autonomous. Dr. Hawkins describes it as courage, love, you know, you're going up, neutrality, courage, and your energy level in that area becomes way less controlling. Right now, you're highly energized but controlled, right? It's devoted into what he would say is forceful. It's a very forceful existence. Whereas when you transcend it, the energy is even bigger, but it's far more powerful. It's infinite, right? You're more open-minded. And this is where, on the Maslow side of the study, where they find when people hit these areas, their temperament completely changes. Their brain changes. They found that when you come up to those higher levels of out of survival mode into these higher levels, it's now you're capable of being more creative because you're more gracious around the end result. You are here nor there around the end result, which is where a lot of incredible research is done, because you're not forceful around the end result, right? Innovation is massive. Again, because if you look at evolution, it's because you're not dying of starvation. You have the ability to change your farming equipment because you have enough in storage, and you have all these things to where you can go, ooh, let's dismantle this and make it better. That's because you're now in those higher levels. So because you're not trying to prove yourself, you're not using it for a narcissistic reason. Right? Now it's coming from the heart, the drive of human nature, which is actually quite loving and caring and creative. We're super creative, but we can't get up in there until you're done self-preserving.
So I'm going to do some writing and work around that.
That's where I would take you. Yeah.
Like letting go of the coping mechanisms.
Yeah, and addressing what's underneath that need to cope. Yeah, and what to simplify it, when you address those coping mechanisms, what it's going to come across is you have to surrender what you're getting out of it. Yeah. The pride, I'm getting a sense of accomplishment. There's always something and those have to be surrendered.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's not getting rid of the misery of what you're doing, because that's easy. Yeah. I have to do that. I have to get rid of what I'm getting out of it. You got it.
Well, I'm getting rid of it. At least bring it into my
own. Correct. Yeah, it's not literal. Yeah. You go into this.
Three really quick questions, because I know it's almost time.
Sure.
And they're kind of real practical. So I'm on thyroid medication. Stop it or keep it?
Well, you know what? Right now, only because I would just stay on it. I mean, I can't just say get off of it. Nothing's changed.
When you're working with people, do you typically stay on it? I know Simeon's recommends getting off it.
He did, because he believed, and I can understand why, that you want to give the protocol, you want to give the body your actual state of being, the ability to change and make whatever endocrine shifts need to occur. However, we have all this science, and just think about your state of fight or flight. If that doesn't change, it's friggin' ridiculous. It's useless.
Right.
Because you're going to trigger the inflammation that the protocol is trying. It is an effect that the hypothesis would be that it's actually recovering from that, right?
Yeah.
As long as you're not triggering those food issues, which is really sensitive on the protocol,
Yeah. I don't see that I am.
Yeah.
You had once said in one of your videos that if you know the resting metabolic rate, you can almost predict with accuracy what people will lose.
Assuming you're in a state of calm. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're burning over $2,000, right? 2,000.
Yeah. I think it's like 228 something.
Yeah, you're probably going to burn around a half a pound a day.
Okay.
That would be what my prediction would be, but it requires that you keep your body, your homeostasis. It's like the temperament, homeostasis, sleeping patterns. You're not traveling a ton. I found a lot of variability when people were in chaos.
Right.
But
the reason I'm asking is because you also recommend that you not weigh yourself every day, which I'm thinking that
pointless.
Maybe I just weigh once a week and knowing a general goal, because I don't want to go up and down with that roller coaster, especially as I'm trying to work on the core belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
And then last but not least, you seem to know a lot about inflammation. I have found no matter how many times nutritionists have said go on probiotics, they totally inflame me.
Mm-hmm.
That, again, is that consistent with your understanding that the gut just can't deal with probiotics when it's when I'm in a fight or flight situation?
It doesn't. Yeah. Well, the probiotics can help to some degree, but in other respects, if your gastric juices aren't flowing, then it just sits in one spot, and you're probably going to have a blowout.
Yeah.
I don't know enough. I'm just sitting here going, let me think. Off of the top of my head, I really don't know. All of this is just observation.
Yeah.
No one really knows, but it would make sense if you're in this chronic state of being that it's just going to sit in your gut.
Yeah.
It's not going to go down.
We introduce them, and it's kind of like I keep waiting for I intuitively knew I have to let my system calm down. And I've literally used those words before the probiotics will work. So intuitively, you confirmed a lot of language and inner dialogue I've had with myself. I like essential oils. I really find them very calming. I use them with my kids a lot. I use peppermint for a headache. I don't want to be obsessive. Worst case scenario, it affects the weight loss. But, have you heard of people using essential oils while they're doing the protocol?
Yeah, and I don't think it really is that significant. Especially if you find that it is a good coping mechanism for you, it's going just.
It really helps the calming.
Then do it. I mean, big picture.
I'll be honest with you. If it means I lose 10 pounds less, so be it.
Who cares? Yeah, you've got to be realistic with yourself, and I think that's important. You're not a caged animal. We have higher thinking. You have to deal with reality, and you're trying to create a vacuum with food in reality. And you know what? If it means you need to, and this is where it's like, if it means you need to have a little cream in your coffee, you know what? Just accept what it is and do it consistently. If it means, no, this isn't like permission to just fuck around. But if it's important to you and you rely on it, just keep on doing it. And good. You kind of answered your own question there too. I don't care about the
So what I'd like to do is I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to do some of the work you've recommended, and then maybe in another month I'd like to maybe follow up and do another consult. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah, that works great.
Send you an email?
Of course, works for me.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. A lot of great insights.
You're welcome.